What is going on, you beautiful humans? I hope that you're continuing to rock those faces. And in this one, you might think that I'm going to be putting the M1 Mac Mini onto a pedestal, but this really is the second hardest workhorse in my business, aside from me. So it's actually going to stay right here in the dirt so that we can continue to get those things done. And it is true that I have literally tried to break this machine by throwing everything at it that I could, and I have got the playlist to prove it. I will link up those videos, but also the stuff that I've actually done where I haven't even published those videos. Now, because I knew I was actually going to be using this as my testing device, I did opt for the 1TB version with 16 gigs of RAM. And although I have several videos on working off of an external drive, you can certainly save some money there. But for anything intensive, from audio work or cutting video, I wouldn't skip out on that 16 gigs of RAM, as it is a worthwhile upgrade. And if you're able to get those things done that you need with 8 gigs of RAM, then that is completely fantastic. But I know that many of the creators in my circles in this space that can confirm that there is a real world difference when it comes to handling the footage and multitasking needed in their particular workflows. And even with that upgraded RAM, this is still the lowest price point to get into a very capable macOS experience. And this Mini right here from 2009, this was my official entry into this particular space. Although I actually did have a Hackintosh that I put together from an MSI netbook. Does anybody remember like netbooks? That was such a fleeting moment. So starting off with some easier workflows, this device can actually cut 4K footage like butter and then put that on a biscuit during the export. But throwing some 8K in a timeline, non-transcoded from a Canon R5 that usually cripples many machines, was definitely a jaw-dropping experience, to say the very least, because I was kind of blown away by that. I was a little nervous, but at the same time blown away. But I even ran a test where I connected an external SSD through a budget hub to purposely bottleneck it. Then I actually tried to render and export that 8K timeline into a customized compressed H.264 video, and I intentionally tried to complicate the workflow. I left that thing running overnight with the CPU and the GPU just cranking through that bottleneck for over 12 hours consistently. And then I finally came in the next morning, just happened to come in the next morning, just as it was finishing up. The CPU and the GPU were just cruising along, and as it was finished, it was basically like, you know what, that was some great avocado toast, but do you actually have something else for me? Now, it sounds like I'm kidding here, but the point really is that Final Cut Pro did not crash. And of course, due to the known bottlenecks of the hub, the external drives, managing the thermals of the CPU and GPU for hours on end, nothing disconnected and the job finished. Like, there were no hiccups, there was nothing. I had an exported file. And of course, I did want to add here that something else that I did, that I purposely did, was that I've mentioned before that there was a kernel issue in Big Sur where there were just random writes to the SSD, where running software through Rosetta, Chrome, and I know Chrome. I love Chrome, but I know that it is a resource hog. But Lightroom and Photoshop, and one of the biggest culprits really was Parallels, where Windows was actually running, or was it actually running? So let me actually say that those applications, except for Chrome, because it's Chrome, but what was happening is that it was just prior to Big Sur 11.4, and I'm not blaming Parallels here, I really am not, because it was the biggest factor, but even having Windows idle and paused, there were some statements that prior to Big Sur 11.4 that this was an issue with the way that the writes were being interpreted. But that's actually a load of horse. Because in my testing where I ran those Thunderbolt benchmarks where the M1s are typically struggling with that higher write speed than their Intel counterparts, however, actually when you tax the system, I've done videos on this, whether it's the CPU, the GPU, or you're running tasks through another Thunderbolt port, you can actually increase that throughput. And definitely as a side note, I did a video or an update on this. It is not fixed in Monterey. But what I did is I just left Windows hanging out idle without any other significant background tasks in macOS to find that I was getting better performance on that write. Because even with Windows, it was supposed to be idle, it was still writing massive amounts of data when it was supposed to be in standby. So I really don't want to spend too much time here on this because I know that there are several forum posts and videos, but I will say that leaving these tasks running while I was actually searching for the actual issue and a solution, it resulted in writing about 130 terabytes of data. And I've had this device since last November when it first launched. So showing, like if you look at Drive DX, it was actually showing about 95% on that lifetime left indicator. And I have updated Drive DX even for Monterey just to double check this. And although that may seem concerning, honestly, I do still that I feel that I have quite a bit of life left in this machine, but I can honestly say it is not an interpretation. It was writing. But I do still use Chrome because it's just better at integrating, but also sandboxing all of those like Google accounts that I have than Safari can basically do. So depending on actually what your needs are and what your workflow is, I would just continue to look out for that as an issue, but I can confirm that so far, Monterey, it seems that the issue may have actually waned a bit, and I can't seem to repeat the problems that I had on Big Sur. However, I am continuing to test those apps through Rosetta as well as Parallels, but hopefully that's actually in the rear view along with Apple's attempt at transparency, because this really should have been prioritized in the first place. And I think if you are interested in gaming, whether that be through Apple Arcade or running titles that are running native on M1, or you even run those through emulation like I do through Parallels. But if that is your primary focus and you're not really interested in macOS otherwise, then I certainly would point you in the direction of a PC like the one that we built. But for those of you that are looking to kind of pivot over after doing whatever it is that you're doing in macOS, you really can still have some fun with this device. And it's only going to continue to get better, because if you think that Apple isn't going to be making a real effort to eventually show up in $250 billion industry worldwide, then this actually just comes down to being overly romantic about gaming hardware. And the hard truth here, whether you want to hear it from me or not, is that business can definitely be sexy, but there is nothing romantic about it. So let me actually completely, after we've just killed the mood there for those that are hardcore gamers, I did mention in one of my recent videos about how I think that the perfect pairing, if you're actually looking for a sidekick, is the iPad Air Gen 4 or the latest iPad Pro. If that is something that you need to like integrate into your workflow, I think it is a perfect pairing. And no, we are not going to focus on what iPadOS doesn't do, because apparently this seems to be eating at some of you, because what we really need to do is highlight that in the right context and in the right workflow, that it's a very capable device. And when we turn that whine into a win, then we can actually start getting that work done. Now, at the time, the Mini right now has the most I/O than any of the other M1 Macs. And although I still think it's limited for some, it is still there. And not to mention adding in a dock or a hub. And yes, you will have to pick up a monitor and some other peripherals, but that's really the beauty of it. You get to actually choose, as painstaking as it is, the monitor. And yes, the iMac does actually have a stunning monitor, as it is an all-in-one, but that task, it may be like something that it takes a little bit of time, but you do get to customize your M1 Mac by adding in those peripherals the way that you want them. And as I always say, that you can typically just use all of those peripherals across multiple devices. So really, in the end, that can actually be a cost savings. But hands down, I am still smitten, and we have been through a lot together, because as much as I've actually tried to stomp on this thing, the Mini just keeps showing up for me time and time again. We have actually had our ups and downs, but the Mini has helped me get to where I am right now, and I do have a lot to be thankful for. And hey, if you are waiting on the next iteration and you have something awesome right now that is serving your needs and waiting is really just a luxury for you, then you, my friends, are all rock stars. And I am glad that you can own that, because yes, it is all going to be better in the next iteration when they actually finally get here, but it'll certainly be at a cost. So as long as it is not costing you the things that matter, you keep rocking those faces. We're gonna get you out of here on this one, and I'll catch you right back here on the next one. I wonder if I should do a review on this one. It does still fire up.